We know how a velociraptor hunted. We know what a Tyrannosaurus ate. We know how Triceratops fought, but until recently, one question seemed unanswerable. How did a dinosaur sleep? The answer turns out to be one of the most charming chapters of recent paleontology, with the central piece of evidence preserved in a single fossil found in 2004. They named it Mei Long, the sleeping dragon. A small feathered dinosaur discovered in China, curled up exactly like a sleeping bird, its head tucked under its wing-like arm, tail wrapped around its body, frozen in a pose of perfect peace by a volcanic eruption 125 million years ago. That single fossil, a juvenile no bigger than a duck, would upend everything paleontologists thought they knew about how dinosaurs rested. Before Mei Long, the question of dinosaur sleep was considered almost unanswerable. You can't fossilize a nap. Behavior doesn't leave bones. At least, that's what the textbooks said. But here, preserved in volcanic ash with haunting delicacy, was a creature caught in the act of doing exactly what you do every night. Head tucked behind a feathered forearm. Body coiled tight. Tail wrapped around like a blanket. It wasn't just dead, it was asleep. And it had been sleeping like a bird. This discovery matters far more than a single charming photograph from deep time. The sleeping posture of Mei Long is a biological billboard. Modern birds tuck their heads to conserve heat, balling up to stay warm through the night. That a 125-million-year-old dinosaur was doing the same thing suggests something extraordinary. That at least some dinosaurs were warm-blooded, their bodies generating internal heat just like yours. This wasn't a cold-blooded lizard sprawled on a rock. This was a creature with a metabolism and behaviors eerily similar to the sparrows outside your window. The implications cascade from there. If a small feathered theropod slept like a bird, what about the giants? Did a 40-foot Tyrannosaurus curl up on the forest floor? Or did it have to stay standing, too massive to rise again if it ever lay down? Could some dinosaurs sleep with half their brain awake, like dolphins, keeping one eye open for predators across 100 million years of night? Since that first fossil emerged from the Liaoning province, paleontologists have uncovered a hidden world of prehistoric slumber. They found more sleeping dragons, more tucked heads, more evidence that the line between dinosaur and bird is so thin it disappears in the dark. We're about to step into that world, a place where fossils are time capsules not just of bones, but of bedtime. Because the story of how a dinosaur slept is really the story of how it lived, how it survived, and how an ancient lineage of nightmares somehow became the birdsong you wake up to this morning. The year was 2004. The place was Liaoning Province, northeastern China. This region is already famous among paleontologists as a window into the Cretaceous period unlike any other on Earth. Here, ancient lake beds and volcanic deposits have preserved not just bones, but feathers, soft tissue, stomach contents, even the colors of dinosaur eggs. It's a fossil Pompeii, where death came so quickly and so completely that entire ecosystems were frozen mid-breath. And in one slab of stone, a farmer, or perhaps a local collector, unearthed something that made even the most jaded researchers stop and stare. It was a small dinosaur, a theropod, the group that includes Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus and today's birds. But this one wasn't posed in the classic death posture that so many dinosaur fossils exhibit, neck arched back, tail stiff, limbs contorted. It was curled up like a house cat. Its head was tucked behind its right forearm, its legs were folded beneath its body, and its long tail was wrapped around the entire arrangement as if tucking itself into bed. The fossil wasn't just a skeleton. It was a moment. The specimen was handed over to scientists, including Xing Xu, one of China's most prolific dinosaur hunters, and Mark Norell from the American Museum of Natural History. They examined it under microscopes, measured every bone, and came to an inescapable conclusion. This animal had been buried alive, smothered instantly by a pyroclastic surge or a blanket of volcanic ash so fine and so fast that it didn't have time to startle. It didn't even lift its head. It died in its sleep. They named it Mei Long. Mei means soundly sleeping in Chinese. Long means dragon. The sleeping dragon. The paper was published in the journal Nature, and it made global headlines. Here was the first definitive fossil evidence of dinosaur behavior that had nothing to do with hunting or fighting or escaping. It was about rest. It was about the most vulnerable moment in any animal's day, and the posture was hauntingly familiar. But here is the thing. That familiarity wasn't just poetic, it was phylogenetic. Birds tuck their heads under their wings or behind their forelimbs to sleep. It's a heat-conserving strategy. Birds are warm-blooded, and maintaining body temperature overnight is energetically expensive. By balling up, they reduce exposed surface area, trap a layer of warm air, and shield their beak and eyes from the cold. For Mei Long to be doing the exact same thing, it had to have been dealing with the same physiological pressures. It had to have been warm-blooded. This was a seismic shift. For decades, the debate about dinosaur metabolism had raged. Were they slow, lumbering reptiles dependent on the sun for warmth? Or were they active, internally heated animals more like mammals and birds? The discovery of feathers had already tilted the scales toward warm-bloodedness for many small theropods. But feathers could theoretically have evolved for display or insulation, without a full endothermic overhaul. The sleeping posture was different. It was a behavior, not an anatomical feature. And behaviors are windows into internal states. You don't curl up to conserve heat unless your body is generating heat to conserve. The holotype of Mei Long was a juvenile, perhaps only a year or two old. Its skull sutures weren't fully fused. Its eyes were proportionally huge like a puppy's. A duck-sized child, alone in the dark of the Cretaceous forest, tucking itself in against the volcanic chill of a Liaoning night, unaware that the ground was about to become its tomb and its time capsule. You can almost hear the quiet, the soft rustle of ferns, the distant rumble before the ash came down. But the story didn't end with one fossil. In 2012, paleontologists reported a second specimen of Mei Long from the same formation, and this one was curled up in the exact same sleeping posture, only mirrored, head tucked under its left forelimb. Two individuals preserved in the same life position, 125 million years apart from anything that would ever study them, confirming that this wasn't a fluke. This was the way they slept, every night, their whole lives. And then came Sinornithoides, another small troodontid, also from China, also found in a sleeping curl, its snout nestled against its folded arms like a child hugging a pillow. Then Jeculinicus, an alvarezsaur from Mongolia, described just last year, preserved in the same avian sleeping posture. A pattern was emerging. It wasn't just one weird species. It was a whole group of maniraptoran dinosaurs, the closest relatives of birds, sleeping like birds tens of millions of years before birds, as we know them, even existed. Think about that. The behavior didn't appear with the first bird. It predates birds. The ancestors of sparrows and crows and eagles were already tucking themselves in, while their lineage still included teeth and claws and long bony tails. When you watch a pigeon roost on a windowsill at dusk, settling its head onto its back, you are seeing a ritual older than the asteroid that killed all the non-avian dinosaurs, older than flowers, older than the Atlantic Ocean. But these were small dinosaurs, duck-sized, turkey-sized. The big question, the terrifying question, was, what about the giants? What about the 50-foot predators and the 100-ton herbivores? The question of how a large dinosaur slept is fundamentally a question of engineering and terror, because lying down for a truly massive animal is not a casual act. It's a commitment, and getting back up is a crisis. Consider a Tyrannosaurus rex, 15 feet tall at the hips, up to 9 tons. If it lay down on its belly, how did it stand up again? Birds can pop upright by pushing with their legs and flapping their wings. A T-Rex had tiny arms, absolutely useless for leverage. Its legs were powerful but positioned under its body. To rise from a prone position, it would have had to heave its entire weight forward and upward in a motion that might have taken minutes, leaving it vulnerable. That's not a great survival strategy if a rival predator or an angry triceratops can show up while you are flopping around like a beached whale. So perhaps T-Rex didn't lie down at all. Perhaps it slept standing up, like a horse or an elephant. Modern elephants can doze while standing, locking their legs to stay upright. But even elephants, for deep REM sleep, have to lie down. When they do, it's a whole production. And they're only a fraction of the weight of a large sauropod. Sauropods, the long-necked titans like Argentinosaurus and Diplodocus, pushed the limits of terrestrial size. 80 tons or more. Did they lie down? If they did, what did sleeping look like for an animal whose neck alone was longer than a bus? If they stood, how did they rest their enormous muscles without collapsing? Could they lock their joints? Did they have specialized tendons like modern ratites? And what about brain sleep? Some scientists have speculated that large dinosaurs, like modern crocodilians and some birds, might have engaged in hemispheric sleep, shutting down one half of the brain at a time while the other half stayed alert. Dolphins do it. Migrating birds do it, flying for weeks without stopping, navigating while literally half asleep. Could a herd of Alamosaurus have stood in the Cretaceous moonlight, each giant resting one hemisphere while the other watched for approaching danger? The fossil evidence for these questions is almost non-existent, but almost doesn't mean zero. And that's where our story takes a turn into the unexpected. Because in the last few years, paleontologists have started to find clues that the giants did leave traces of their nighttime habits. Not curled up in ash, but in footprints, in trackways, in the very physics of bone and joint, and the silent testimony of sedimentary rock. The sleeping dragon was just the beginning. The real mystery is what happened when the lights went out on a world ruled by monsters, and every single one of them had to close its eyes and trust the darkness. That trust was sometimes broken, and the evidence of how it was broken and how they survived it is waiting in the ground. To find it, we have to leave the curled-up troodontids of China and travel west, across the steppes of Mongolia and into the Badlands of North America, where a different kind of clue was emerging. Not from ashfall, but from mud. Not from bodies, but from footprints. Imagine a Cretaceous floodplain, soft with silt after a season of rain. A herd of sauropods crosses it, each step pressing deep into the ground. Where they walked, they left tracks. But where they stopped, they left something rarer, resting traces. These are fossilized impressions not just of feet but of bellies, tails, and the full weight of a living animal lowering itself to the earth. In the last 2 decades, paleontologists have identified several sites that preserve what look like sauropod, squatting marks, deep, elongated depressions where a massive dinosaur sat back on its haunches, its front limbs still planted, its tail dragging behind like a counterweight, its body at rest. One such trace, from the Morrison Formation in Utah, shows the imprint of a juvenile Diplodocus settling onto the ground, its hind feet splayed, its pubic bone pressing into the mud, its ischial callosities, the sitting pads that birds and mammals have, leaving clear contours. It wasn't curled up like a little troodontid. It was resting like a giant reptilian camel, folding itself into the landscape. But were these animals sleeping? The problem is that a resting trace is just a snapshot. It could be a midday break, not nighttime slumber. Yet, some of these traces are found in clusters, with multiple individuals of different sizes, all settled down together, their body impressions oriented in the same direction, away from the prevailing wind. This suggests something more than a casual pause. It suggests a herd bedding down for the night, the adults forming a protective ring, the juveniles huddled in the center, just as modern elephants do on the African savanna. The behavior was social. It was coordinated. It was a ritual of survival that played out night after night across the Mesozoic world. For a sauropod, lying down was a calculated risk. An 80-ton Argentinosaurus, once prone, needed to rise again. How did it do it? If you watch a horse get up, it uses its forelimbs as a lever, rocking forward and pushing with its powerful hind legs. A sauropod's forelimbs were pillar-like, its hind limbs colossal. Some paleontologists argue that sauropods could rise by rocking forward onto their front feet and then thrusting upward with their hindquarters, using their tail as a stabilizer. Others suggest they might have rolled onto their side, like a beached whale, kicking until they gained traction. Either method would have taken precious minutes, during which the animal was vulnerable to predators. That vulnerability might explain why some sauropod resting traces are found in the middle of trackways that suddenly become chaotic, as if a predator attacked while the herd was down, scattering them in panic. The earth itself has recorded the terror of a night interrupted. But here is the thing. None of these resting traces prove the animal was truly asleep. Standing rest, like modern large mammals often do, would have been far safer. An elephant can lock its knees and doze while upright, its huge body supported by a column of bone. Could a sauropod do the same? Their limbs were straight, their joints massive. But there's a crucial difference. Sauropods lacked the locking mechanisms that horses and elephants have. Their knees were simple hinges, not designed to stay extended without muscular effort. Standing sleep would have required constant muscle tension, which is the opposite of rest. So perhaps sauropods simply didn't enter deep sleep at all. Perhaps they existed in a permanent state of drowsy vigilance, never fully surrendering to unconsciousness, their enormous bodies generating heat that had to be managed, their brains drifting through a limbo of half-awareness. That idea, the half-sleep, is where our story takes a truly bizarre turn. Because modern birds can do something that seems impossible. They can sleep with one eye open. Literally. It's called unihemispheric slow-wave sleep, and it means that one hemisphere of the brain is asleep while the other remains awake and alert. The corresponding eye stays open, monitoring the environment. Migrating birds like swifts and albatrosses can fly for weeks without landing, navigating while half their brain catches micronaps. Dolphins do it, surfacing every few seconds to breathe, while their awake hemisphere keeps them swimming and scanning for sharks. And crocodilians, the closest living relatives of dinosaurs besides birds, also exhibit unihemispheric sleep. Studies on juvenile American alligators have shown that they sleep with one eye open when a human is present, the eye watching the perceived threat, even as the rest of the body rests. If crocs can do it, and birds can do it, then the common ancestor of both, the archosaur that gave rise to dinosaurs, almost certainly had this ability. Dinosaurs, by phylogenetic inference, could sleep with half a brain awake. This changes everything about how we imagine a Cretaceous night. A herd of Alamosaurus standing in the moonlit forest might look like a gathering of statues. But half of each animal's brain is asleep, the other half scanning the darkness with a reptilian focus. The sentinel isn't a single individual on watch while the rest sleep. The sentinel is inside every head. It's a distributed alarm system, a biological inheritance that made dinosaurs nearly impossible to ambush. But if that's true, why did Mei Long curl up and shut both eyes? The answer might lie in size. Unihemispheric sleep is most critical for animals that must stay mobile, flyers, swimmers, or those too massive to hide. For a small, feathered dinosaur on the forest floor, tucking into a ball and going fully asleep was a gamble, but one mitigated by the warmth conservation and the fact that a duck-sized creature could hide under ferns. The sleep strategy was a balance of heat, hunger, and predation risk. And that balance shifted with body size. The bigger you were, the less you could afford to go completely offline. Now, at this point, You might be thinking, wait, haven't I seen dinosaur fossils curled up in a death pose before? The head thrown back, the tail arched. Weren't those sleeping dinosaurs? And this is where our entire understanding of the dinosaur fossil record took a sharp and contentious turn. Because for more than a century, paleontologists unearthed skeletons with the neck dramatically arched backward, the tail curved upward, a posture sometimes called the opisthatonic pose. In popular books and museum displays, it was often interpreted as the animal's final death throes, or, romantically, as a sleeping position. The idea that these were sleeping dinosaurs was a comforting one. It made the bones seem less like a crime scene and more like a bedtime story. But in 2007, a team of researchers led by Cynthia Marshall-Foe published a paper that shattered that illusion. They argued, with experimental evidence, that the classic dinosaur death pose is not a behavior at all. It's a post-mortem artifact. When a dinosaur died in water or was submerged shortly after death, the ligaments along the spine contracted as they dried, pulling the neck and tail backward into that characteristic arch. Live animals don't do that. The pose is a trick of taphonomy, the processes that happen between death and fossilization. It was never sleep. It was water and time and the slow pull of desiccating tendons. This means that every fossil you thought showed a sleeping dinosaur, the famous Allosaurus with its head thrown back, the Albertosaurus in a dramatic curve, was a corpse distorted by the laws of physics, not a peaceful sleeper. The true sleeping fossils are vanishingly rare. Mei Long is not just charming. It is an almost impossible treasure. The ash that killed it also preserved its actual life posture, not a death mask. It is the difference between a photograph of someone sleeping and an autopsy report. And then, just when we thought the picture was complete, the ground yielded another surprise. In 2021, in the Gobi Desert of Mongolia, a team led by Kota Tanaka and Yoshitsugu Kobayashi uncovered a slab of rock that contained not one, not two, but 3 individuals of a small oviraptorosaur huddled together in a tight cluster. Their heads were tucked into their bodies, their limbs intertwined. They weren't just sleeping, they were roosting together. Social sleep. A dinosaur cuddle pile, preserved in 3 dimensions, as if a sudden sandstorm had entombed a slumber party. This was a different kind of revelation. It meant that for some dinosaurs, sleep was a social act. They sought each other's warmth, shared body heat, maybe even draped feathers over one another like a living blanket. Modern birds do this. Penguins huddle in Antarctic storms, rotating from the cold edge to the warm center. Sparrows cluster on branches on winter nights. The instinct to sleep together, to find safety in numbers, is ancient. It predates the first mammal. It may have been one of the original glues that held dinosaur societies together. And if they slept together, they almost certainly dreamed together. Or, at least, something like dreaming. Birds experience REM sleep, the stage associated with vivid dreams in humans. During REM, the brain is highly active, the eyes dart beneath closed lids, and the body is paralyzed. Studies on zebra finches have shown that they replay their songs in their brains during sleep, practicing without a sound. If birds do this and their dinosaur ancestors had the same brain architecture, the same basal ganglia, the same pallial structures, then it's plausible that a sleeping Troodon replayed the day's hunt in its dreams, or that a mother Maiasaura dreamed of her chicks. Sleep was not just a biological necessity for dinosaurs. It was a cognitive one. It was a space where memories were consolidated, where learning was reinforced, where the events of a dangerous world were processed into survival strategies. But this is where our understanding stalls against a wall of missing evidence. We have the sleeping troodontids, the roosting oviraptorosaurs, the resting traces of sauropods. What we utterly lack is a definitive example of a large theropod sleeping. No Tyrannosaurus bed, no Allosaurus nest, no Giganotosaurus curled in ash. The giants are silent, And that silence is maddening. Because the question of how a multi-ton predator slept isn't just a curiosity. It's a question of what it was like to be a dinosaur. What did the world look like when the king of the food chain closed its eyes? Was it vulnerable? Did anything dare attack it? Did it dream of hunting? Or was its brain running threat simulations of its own? The apex predator's sleep is the final frontier of dinosaur behavior, the one we cannot directly observe, but we can infer. And the inferences lead us to a terrifying and magnificent possibility. If we gather everything we know, the respiratory anatomy, the center of gravity, the limb mechanics, the phylogenetic heritage, the most likely sleeping posture for a Tyrannosaurus rex was neither lying flat on its belly nor crouched like a bird. It was something in between. Picture it. The huge animal settles onto the ground, its massive hind legs folded beneath it, its tail extended straight back for balance, its torso leaning slightly to one side so that one massive thigh takes the weight. The tiny arms are tucked against the chest. The head, that 5-foot skull packed with serrated teeth, is lowered onto the forelimbs or rested on a mound of vegetation. It looks less like a sleeping sparrow and more like a resting lion, a predator still coiled, still dangerous, even in repose. It might sleep deeply for short periods, perhaps during the warmest part of the day, but at night it remains in a lighter state, one hemisphere always listening for the approach of rivals. Because for T. rex, the greatest threat wasn't something bigger, it was another T. rex. The fossil record has whispered a hint of this. In 2010, a team working in Montana announced the discovery of a curious depression in the Hell Creek Formation. A shallow, oval-shaped hollow surrounded by the scattered remains of a juvenile Triceratops. The depression had the dimensions of a large theropod's body. Around it were T. rex foot tracks, the toes pointing inward. The site was interpreted not as a nest, but as a resting spot, a place where a T. rex had spent time, perhaps feeding, perhaps sleeping. The bones of the juvenile Triceratops showed bite marks that matched T. rex teeth, and some were broken in ways consistent with being stripped of meat. It was a crime scene and a bedroom all at once. A predator had eaten, then settled down in the very place it had dined, like a lion guarding a kill. The hollow in the earth might have been shaped by the animal's own body, heat and weight, compressible enough over hours to leave a lasting impression. And that's where our escalation reaches its first major pivot. Because everything we've discussed so far, the curling up, the huddling, the standing vigil, the mysterious hollows, all of it rests on one assumption, that dinosaurs slept at regular intervals, like we do. But what if they didn't? What if the concept of a night's sleep is a mammalian imposition on a world that operated differently? What if some dinosaurs simply didn't sleep for long stretches, surviving on a series of micro-naps that totaled enough rest without ever leaving them truly unconscious? This hypothesis, radical as it sounds, has support from the realm of modern reptiles. Crocodiles can go without sleep for extended periods, especially during nesting season. Some lizards enter a state of rest that isn't quite sleep, their brains idling rather than powering down. If dinosaurs were intermediate between classic reptiles and modern birds, their sleep patterns might have been just as intermediate, flexible, opportunistic, and utterly alien to our own experience. A hadrosaur might have dozed standing in a lake, safe from predators. A ceratopsian might have slept in shifts within a herd, like geese, with designated sentinels. A dromaeosaur pack might have rested in quick bursts between hunts, never fully committing to slumber until they'd secured a den. This reframes all those resting traces and sleeping fossils. They may represent the minority of dinosaur rest behavior, the rare moments when conditions were safe enough for total surrender. Most of the time, the Mesozoic night was not a lullaby. It was a continuation of the day's brutal calculus, just in dimmer light. And the creatures that survived it did so not by sleeping deeply, but by never fully letting go. Yet despite that, the allure of the sleeping dragon remains. Because no matter how terrifying the night was, every dinosaur that ever lived eventually succumbed to exhaustion. They had to. The biological necessity of sleep is almost universal among animals. Even the mightiest predators collapsed into vulnerability on a regular basis, trusting their size, their herds, or their half-awake brains to carry them through to dawn. That trust was a gamble played out billions of times across the 160-million-year reign of the dinosaurs, and most of the time, it paid off. The evidence of how it paid off, the success stories and the catastrophic failures, is buried in deposits all over the world. And now we're going to dig into the most spectacular of those stories. A single night in the life of a dinosaur reconstructed from the clues they left behind. Not a fossil frozen in sleep, but a trackway that tells a story of pursuit, escape, and a desperate gamble that might have ended in a resting place that became a grave. Because sometimes, the ground that holds the secret of how a dinosaur slept also holds the secret of how it died. And in the next layer of stone, those two stories converge. And in the next layer of stone, those two stories converge. In the remote Badlands of southern Utah, there is a slab of sandstone so large it had to be left in place, protected by a shelter from the desert sun. It's not a bone bed. It's a trackway, hundreds of footprints pressed into the mud of an ancient lake margin, now hardened into rock. For decades, paleontologists have studied this slab as a record of routine dinosaur movement. But a few years ago, a team led by Lisa Buckley from the Peace Region Paleontology Research Center took a fresh look and noticed something no one had paid attention to before. The tracks didn't just record walking, they recorded panic. And at the center of the chaos was a cluster of resting traces. The story written in that stone begins at dusk. A herd of sauropods, juvenile Diplodocus perhaps, had settled into a shallow basin for the night. The basin was a natural windbreak, a dip in the landscape where the air was still and the ground was soft. You can see their resting traces clearly, deep oval depressions where their bodies compressed the mud, tail drags leading straight back like a dozen lazy signatures. The herd was arranged in a rough circle, adults on the outside, juveniles at the core, a textbook defensive formation. They were asleep. Then another set of tracks enters the scene. Large, three-toed, with the distinct hallmarks of an Allosaurus-sized theropod. Not one, multiple sets, coming from downwind. The first sauropod that sensed them was probably one on the edge, maybe a subadult not yet skilled at reading scents. Its resting trace ends abruptly. The mud around it is churned with the deep slashes of heavy feet pushing off in a hurry. Its walking track accelerates, strides lengthening into a run. Within moments, the entire herd erupted. The trackway shows what happened next. The juveniles scattered in all directions. One little Diplodocus, half the size of its companions, made a sharp turn to the right, its steps shortening, its feet sliding in the mud as if it stumbled. And behind it, the predator's tracks close the distance with terrible precision. The final footprints in the sequence are on top of each other, predator and prey intersecting so closely, you can't tell whose foot came down first. And then, nothing. The tracks stop. The mud tells no more. Did the juvenile escape? Was it dragged away? The rest of the slab doesn't say, but the implication is chilling. This was a night assault on a sleeping herd. The safety of numbers, the sentinels, the tucked-in bodies, all of it failed. And the ground remembers every second of the terror. This single slab forces us to reconsider everything we've assumed about dinosaur sleep safety. Social sleeping wasn't a guarantee. The herd formation, the circle of adults, might have been less a fortress and more a lottery, buying time for those at the center while those on the edges paid the price. It's the same brutal arithmetic that plays out on the Serengeti every night today when lions test the boundaries of a sleeping wildebeest herd. Dinosaurs, for all their grandeur, were animals. And animals, when asleep, are meat. The implications cascade far beyond this one slab. Across the Morrison Formation, at multiple trackway sites, researchers have found similar patterns, resting traces of sauropods interspersed with large theropod tracks, often oriented in the direction of the resting herd. It suggests that predators learned to hunt at night, specializing in attacking sleeping giants. Theropods, with forward-facing eyes, like Allosaurus, might have had excellent depth perception in low light. Their olfactory bulbs, judging from brain endocasts, were large enough to track scent plumes across the dark basin. They could smell the herd before they saw it, circling downwind until the moment was right. The night wasn't a sanctuary. It was a feeding ground. But what about the big theropods themselves? If an Allosaurus could terrorize a sleeping sauropod herd, who terrorized the Allosaurus when it slept? The answer is written in bone. In 2009, a team working in the Cleveland Lloyd Quarry in Utah, a site famous for containing an abnormal number of Allosaurus skeletons, published a provocative reanalysis. For decades, the quarry was interpreted as a predator trap, a sticky mudhole where carnivores got stuck while trying to scavenge. But the new analysis found something odd. Many of the Allosaurus bones were broken in ways consistent with being trampled, and many were found in a concentrated layer with no evidence of a mud trap. More tellingly, some skeletons showed bite marks from other Allosaurus, bite marks on the back of the skull, on the neck, on the hips, the places where a predator would attack from behind. The researchers proposed a radical reinterpretation. The Cleveland Lloyd Allosaurus weren't trapped. They were killed, ambushed while resting, possibly by their own kind. If Allosaurus slept on the ground, like a big resting lion, it would have been vulnerable to cannibalistic attacks or conflicts with rivals. A sleeping predator is still a predator, but its defenses are down. A well-timed bite to the back of the neck could end a million-year reign in seconds. The quarry, in this view, is not a death trap of sticky mud. It is a battlefield, a record of multiple nights, perhaps over years, when Allosaurus turned on each other in the dark. The sleeping spot became a kill zone. This reframes our earlier speculation about T. rex resting spots, the hollow in Montana, with the juvenile Triceratops bones that might have been not just a bedroom, but a fortress. A T. rex defending its kill from scavengers while it slept, waking at the slightest sound to protect its meal. Or, perhaps, it was the opposite, a T. rex that fell asleep after gorging, only to be ambushed by a rival, the hollow preserving the scuffle. The Montana site has no clear theropod tracks after the resting trace, which could mean it woke and left, or it never did. And yet, even with these glimpses of violence, the sleeping dinosaurs that we do find in fossil form, the Mei Long, the roosting oviraptorosaurs, are remarkable for their lack of trauma. They were killed by volcanoes, by sandstorms, by poisonous gases, but not by teeth. They died in peace, even if that peace was a prelude to disaster. That paradox is what makes the sleeping fossils so precious. They capture the moment before the terror, the last instant of normalcy in a Cretaceous night that was about to end. But here is where the story takes an even bigger turn. Because if we pull back from the individual sleeping dinosaur and look at the global pattern, we discover something astonishing. Dinosaurs didn't just sleep differently based on size and species. They likely occupied different sleep schedules across the entire day-night cycle. A modern ecosystem has nocturnal, diurnal, and crepuscular species. The Mesozoic was no different, and the evidence for this is not just in the bones. It's in the eyes. Look at a dinosaur skull, and you can learn about its visual capabilities. Sclerotic rings, the circles of bone that surround the eye in many vertebrate groups, preserve the size and shape of the eye opening. By measuring these rings, scientists can infer whether an animal was adapted for daytime, nighttime or twilight activity. A team led by Lars Schmitz and Ryosuke Motani applied this technique to a range of dinosaurs and published their results in 2011. The findings were electric. Velociraptor, the famous dromaeosaur, had an eye shape consistent with night hunting. It was a nocturnal predator. Protoceratops, that horned herbivore often found locked in combat with Velociraptor, was cathemeral, active both day and night, with no strong preference. Meanwhile, some pterosaurs were day flyers, their huge eyes missing the adaptations for low light. The Mesozoic sky and land had a shift change. When the sun set, the daytime species went to roost, and the night crew took over. Sleep was not a synchronized event. It was a staggered, continuous rhythm across the global dinosaur community. This means that the danger of the night was not just from the environment or from rivals. It was from an entire guild of specialists who had evolved to own the darkness. A sleeping sauropod herd might be safe from an Allosaurus that couldn't see well in the dark. But it was not safe from a pack of velociraptor-sized night hunters that could navigate by moonlight. The sleeping postures we find, the tucking, the clustering, were not just against cold. They were against a world that could see you when you couldn't see it. Now, imagine taking that global, staggered sleep ecosystem and hitting it with the worst possible disaster. An asteroid impact so catastrophic that it blotted out the sun for years. The KPG mass extinction, 66 million years ago, didn't just kill dinosaurs. It destroyed their entire circadian rhythm. The darkness that followed the impact from the dust and sulfate aerosols injected into the atmosphere would have lasted at least 18 months, possibly much longer. Photosynthesis collapsed. Plants died, and with them, the herbivores starved. But before starvation, there was confusion. A permanent night without a dawn. Diurnal dinosaurs that needed light to forage couldn't function. Nocturnal dinosaurs that relied on a cycle of day and night to hunt were thrown into chaos. The staggered shift schedule that had sustained the Mesozoic world for 160 million years was replaced by a single, unending twilight. No dinosaur, no matter how well it slept, was adapted for a world without a morning. The sleep behaviors that had protected them, the tucking, the sentinel half-brains, the herd circles, were useless against a darkness that never lifted. The very warmth that May long conserved by curling up became a liability, because warm-blooded animals need constant energy, and without plants there was no energy to find. The sleeping posture that told us dinosaurs were alive and vibrant also tells us why they were doomed. They had evolved to survive a night, not an endless winter of shadow. But not all dinosaurs died. Some slept through the apocalypse. The avian dinosaurs, the birds, survived the asteroid. And the question of why they survived is perhaps the final, most profound mystery of dinosaur sleep. Because birds, as we've seen, inherited their sleeping posture directly from their ancestors like Mei Long. They tuck, they cluster, they sleep with half a brain awake. So what made them different? Why did a duck-sized troodontid perish in a flash of ash, while the ancestors of modern sparrows flew through the cataclysm and came out the other side? The answer might lie in where they slept. Birds that survived the KPG were almost certainly ground nesters or burrowers. The asteroid impact, besides the atmospheric darkness, triggered wildfires, acid rain, and a global temperature drop. A small dinosaur that could hide in a burrow, curl up, and enter a state of torpor, a deep physiological slowdown, could ride out the worst weeks. Torpor, a form of shallow hibernation, is common in modern small birds and mammals. If the avian predecessors had this ability, they could have slept not just for a night, but for days, conserving energy until conditions improved. The non-avian dinosaurs, no matter how elegant their sleep postures, were not burrowers. They were exposed, and when the sun vanished they had nowhere to hide. But there is one more twist. A twist that changes how we see the sleeping dragon forever. In 2020, a team of paleontologists from the University of Edinburgh published a study on the bone histology of the two May-long specimens. They wanted to understand whether these juveniles died at the same time, in the same event. The volcanic ash that buried them was dated to the same season, the onset of winter. The detailed analysis of their growth rings showed something unexpected. The two curled-up dinosaurs, found in the same formation but not in the same slab, had died not just in the same season, but in the same posture, in the same ashfall. That was already known. What was new was this. Their stomach content traces, preserved as acid-etched regions in the ribcage, contained the remnants of ferns that only grow in the spring. They had eaten a spring meal, then curled up for what should have been a routine night. But the volcanic ash that killed them was chemically consistent with an eruption that occurred in the early winter. They didn't just die in their sleep. They had been sleeping for months. The hypothesis, still debated, is astonishing. May Long might have been a hibernator. The curled posture wasn't just a nightly tuck. It was a seasonal torpor pose, a strategy to survive the Liaoning winter by slowing metabolism, curling tight, and waiting. If true, then the sleeping dragon isn't just a picture of a dinosaur at bedtime. It's a picture of a dinosaur that beat extinction by sleeping through it, season after season, year after year, until one winter the volcano caught up. Hibernation, the ultimate sleep, was already a dinosaur invention long before mammals ever thought of it. This possibility ties every thread of our story together. The sleeping postures we find in fossils are not just charming anomalies. They are expressions of biological strategies that spanned the entire spectrum of dinosaur life. The nightly tuck for warmth, the social cluster for safety, the half-brain sentinel for vigilance, the standing doze for giants, and the deep seasonal sleep for survival. Dinosaurs didn't just sleep. They mastered every form of rest the animal kingdom has ever devised. And they did it so successfully that one lineage, the birds, still carries those ancient behaviors in its bones today. The next time you see a sparrow settling onto a branch at dusk, its head disappearing backward into its feathers, you are watching a ritual that has survived 160 million years of evolution. That sparrow is a dinosaur going to sleep, and in its tucked head and folded wings is the echo of a lost world, where giant shadows moved through the night, where herds huddled for warmth under a Cretaceous moon, and where a tiny, duck-sized ancestor of all birds curled up in a bed of ferns, closed its eyes, and waited for a dawn that came 10 million times before it finally didn't. But the ultimate test of dinosaur sleep was not a predator, not a volcano, but an event that would challenge the very fabric of their existence. And that test began on a night exactly 66 million years ago. The night the asteroid hit. The night the asteroid hit somewhere in what is now the Yucatan Peninsula. A rock the size of Mount Everest slammed into the Earth at 45,000 miles per hour. The impact released energy equivalent to 10 billion Hiroshima bombs. In the immediate blast radius, everything within 1,000 miles was incinerated instantly. But for the dinosaurs sleeping on the other side of the planet, the first sign of the apocalypse wasn't fire. It wasn't sound. It was light. A flash brighter than the sun, reflected off the atmosphere, would have lit up the night sky like a second dawn. Dinosaurs sleeping in what should have been darkness woke to shadows racing across the ground, to the horizon glowing with an eerie orange pulse. The ones in unihemispheric sleep, with one eye open, saw it first. The ones fully asleep, curled and tucked like May Long, might have stirred, confused, their internal clocks screaming that it was still night, their eyes reporting impossible brightness. The herds that had bedded down in defensive circles, the predators that had settled into their hollows, the hatchlings nestled under their mother's warmth, all of them woke to a world that had just changed forever. The light faded. The darkness returned, deeper than before, and then came the sound. A roar so vast it circled the globe, a continuous thunder that lasted for hours as the shockwave traveled through the atmosphere. The ground shook, Not in a single earthquake, but in a rolling, relentless tremor that rippled through the crust. Burrows collapsed, trees toppled, herds standing in open ground were thrown from their feet. Any dinosaur that had chosen that night to sleep in a riverbed or on soft sediment was buried alive as the earth liquefied beneath them. The resting traces of that night, if any survived, would be chaos, footprints of animals that never had a chance to fully stand, body impressions that ended in a smear, the geological signature of a world caught asleep. Within hours, the sky began to fill with debris. Vaporized rock, sulfur compounds, and soot from global wildfires climbed into the stratosphere, forming a blanket that would not lift for years. The darkness that followed was not the darkness of night. It was the darkness of a sealed room. Photosynthesis stopped. The temperature plummeted. The global ecosystem, built on a foundation of sunlight and plants, collapsed from the bottom up. For the dinosaurs, the first few days were a crisis of confusion and hunger. Diurnal herbivores couldn't find food in the perpetual twilight. Nocturnal predators, adapted for low light, might have hunted successfully at first, feasting on the disoriented and the dying. But within weeks, the prey was gone. The predators turned on each other. The Cleveland-Lloyd quarry pattern, the Allosaurus killing Allosaurus, might have played out on a planetary scale, every sleeping spot becoming a potential ambush, every hollow a grave. But the true test wasn't the violence. It was the cold. Without sunlight, global temperatures dropped by as much as 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the first year. Large dinosaurs, with their enormous surface area and high metabolic demands, couldn't find enough food to stay warm. The sleeping postures they had evolved, the tucking, the clustering, were designed for a normal night's chill, not an endless winter. A herd of sauropods, huddling together, could share body heat for a few hours, but not for months. A T-Rex curled in its hollow might conserve some warmth, but its 9-ton body needed thousands of calories a day. When those calories ran out, it died where it lay. The fossil record of the KPG boundary, that thin layer of iridium-rich clay found all over the world, contains no dinosaur fossils above it. Not one. Every non-avian dinosaur skeleton ever discovered comes from below that line. Above it, only fragments, only hints of the avian survivors. The extinction was total for everything that couldn't hide, couldn't burrow, couldn't enter a state of deep torpor and wait. And here is where the story of dinosaur sleep reaches its final beautiful resolution. Because the dinosaurs that survived, the birds, didn't survive in spite of their sleeping habits. They survived because of them. The tucking posture that May long pioneered, the social roosting we see in those Mongolian oviraptorosaur clusters, the ability to enter torpor and lower metabolic rate, these weren't just charming bedtime rituals. They were the key to outlasting the worst catastrophe in Earth's history. Modern birds can drop their body temperature by as much as 50 degrees during torpor. Their heart rates slow to a fraction of normal. They can survive for days or weeks on stored fat, barely breathing, waiting out cold snaps and food shortages. This ability is almost certainly ancient, inherited from their Maniraptoran ancestors. The same physiological machinery that let May long survive Liaoning winters, curled in its feathered ball, was the machinery that let avian dinosaurs ride out the asteroid winter. While the giant sauropods froze and the tyrannosaurs starved, a tiny feathered dinosaur tucked in a burrow, its metabolism dialed down to a whisper, its body temperature matching the cooling earth, simply waited. And waited. And when the skies finally cleared and the sun returned, and the first ferns pushed through the ash, it woke up. The sleeping dragon didn't just charm us. It showed us how to survive the end of the world. But the story doesn't end with the asteroid. Because in the 66 million years since, the birds have taken that ancient sleep toolkit and diversified it into an astonishing array of strategies. The tucking behavior of Mei Long is now performed by 10,000 species, from hummingbirds that enter nightly torpor so deep they appear dead, to albatrosses that sleep while flying across open oceans, one hemisphere navigating, the other dreaming. The social roosting of those Mongolian oviraptorosaurs is now practiced by starlings that gather in murmurations of millions, by penguins that form huddles so dense and organized that individuals rotate from the cold exterior to the warm interior in a slow, cooperative dance. The half-brained sleep of ancient archosaurs is now routine in mallards, which sleep in rows on the edge of ponds, the ducks on the ends keeping their outer eyes open, their outer brain hemispheres awake, while the ducks in the middle sleep fully with both eyes shut. And in one of the most remarkable discoveries of recent neuroscience, researchers have found that birds experience REM sleep and slow-wave sleep in patterns strikingly similar to mammals, despite having evolved these patterns independently. A sleeping zebra finch replays its song in its brain, practicing, refining. A sleeping crow might replay the day's problem-solving, consolidating memories of tricky puzzles. The dinosaur brain, it turns out, didn't just sleep. It processed, it learned, it dreamed. What did a T-Rex dream about? We will never know. But the neurological architecture that produces dreams, the replay of waking experience, the consolidation of memory, the integration of fear and reward, is so ancient, so deeply conserved across vertebrates, that it almost certainly existed in non-avian dinosaurs. When that Allosaurus settled into its hollow, when that sauropod herd closed its collective eyes, when that tiny troodontid curled in its fern bed, their brains were doing what your brain does tonight, sorting the day, strengthening connections, rehearsing survival. The Mesozoic night was not a void. It was a theater of neural activity, a planet-wide dreamscape that lasted for 160 million years. And then, there is the final, most intimate connection between dinosaur sleep and your sleep. You, lying in your bed, listening to this, wrapped in blankets warm and safe. Your body temperature is dropping slightly, as it does every night, a signal to your brain that sleep is near. Your breathing is slowing. Your muscles are relaxing. In a few minutes, if you let yourself, you will curl up, not into a tight ball like Mei Long, perhaps, but into some variation of the fetal position, the most common sleeping posture among humans. You'll tuck your arms in, draw your legs up, and surrender to the darkness. That posture is not coincidental. The fetal position is ancient, shared across mammals, and functionally similar to the tucking behavior of birds and their dinosaur ancestors. It conserves heat. It protects the vulnerable abdomen. It signals to the nervous system that the environment is safe enough for total vulnerability. When you curl up tonight, you are not just copying a dinosaur. You are expressing a biological imperative that has been shaped by hundreds of millions of years of evolution passed down through the lineage of vertebrates, refined by countless nights of danger and survival. The distance between you and Mei Long is vast in time, but narrow in form. The sleeping dragon is your distant cousin, and its bedtime ritual lives on in your own. The fossil that started this journey, that tiny theropod in Liaoning, head tucked, tail wrapped, ash settling on its feathers like a final blanket, is still there, in a museum collection, under glass. If you ever stand before it, you'll see exactly what the paleontologist saw in 2004, an animal that lived and breathed, and had habits just like yours. It ate ferns. It walked on two legs. It had feathers the color of forest shadow, and at the end of its day, it found a safe spot, curled into a ball, and went to sleep, trusting the world to still be there when it woke. The world wasn't there, not that time. The volcano took it. But the behavior outlasted the individual, and the lineage outlasted the extinction, and the birds outlasted the asteroid, and now, 125 million years later, here you are, a mammal with a dinosaur's bedtime habit, curling up in the dark, closing your eyes, drifting off. the last in a long line of creatures who learned, through trial and error and the slow grind of natural selection, how to sleep in a world full of monsters. The monsters are gone now, but the sleep remains. And every night, when you tuck yourself in, you are participating in a ritual older than the Rocky Mountains, older than flowers, older than the separation of South America from Africa. You are doing what dinosaurs did. You are closing your eyes. You are letting go. You are trusting the darkness to deliver you safely to morning. And most of the time it does. And when it does, when the morning light slips through the curtains and you stir slowly back into consciousness, you are completing a cycle that has run uninterrupted since the Triassic. The waking is as ancient as the sleeping. The stretch of muscles, the slow reassembly of awareness, the first breath of a new day. These are rituals that every dinosaur that ever survived a night also performed. The sun rose on the Cretaceous, just as it rises on you, and 100 billion mornings have been met by creatures blinking away dreams, checking the world for danger, and beginning again. There is something profoundly humbling in this. We tend to think of dinosaurs as remote, alien, separated from us by an unbridgeable chasm of time and form. But sleep collapses that distance. When a Tyrannosaurus closed its eyes, when a herd of Diplodocus settled into the mud, when May long curled into its feathery ball, they were doing exactly what you do every night. They were surrendering, trusting, entering a state of vulnerability that is the great equalizer of all animal life. No amount of teeth or armor or size can alter the fundamental fact that to sleep is to be fragile. The world's most fearsome predators, at the end of their day, were just animals that needed to rest. And perhaps that's the lingering question this story leaves us with. Not just how dinosaurs slept, but what it means that we can know it at all. The science that brought us May long, the volcanic ash that preserved it, the careful eyes that recognized it, the phylogenetic detective work that connected it to modern birds, is a bridge across time. We can never visit the Cretaceous. We can never watch a sleeping Allosaurus in the wild. But we have, impossibly, captured a snapshot of a single dinosaur taking its nightly rest. That snapshot is a gift from geology, a message in stone that says, "You are not so different. They were alive, like you. They slept, like you. They were part of the same great chain of being that now includes your bedroom, your blankets, your drifting thoughts as you listen to these words." There is a temptation to end this story with the asteroid, with the fiery cataclysm that erased the non-avian dinosaurs from the Earth. It makes for a dramatic finale. But the true ending is not in destruction. It's in continuity. The asteroid did not end the story of dinosaur sleep. It just changed the cast. The birds that survived, the ones that could torpor through the cold and dark, carried the sleeping behaviors of their ancestors into the new world. They spread across every continent, into every niche. They became the 10,000 species that now fill our forests and skies and cities with song. And they still sleep like dinosaurs because they are dinosaurs. So the next time you see a pigeon roosting on a building ledge, its head vanished into its shoulder feathers, you are looking at a direct descendant of May long. The posture is the same. The neural circuits that control it are largely the same. The need for warmth and safety that drives it is identical. The pigeon is not mimicking a dinosaur. It is a dinosaur, doing what dinosaurs have done for 160 million years. The extinction was not an erasure. It was a transformation. And the sleeping dragon, far from being a fossilized tragedy, is actually a portrait of an ancestor. One whose lineage made it through the worst day in Earth's history and came out the other side, still tucking, still dreaming, still trusting the night. This perspective should change how you think about your own sleep. Tonight, when you settle into bed, you are not just ending your day. You are participating in a biological tradition that predates the Grand Canyon, that saw the rise and fall of the dinosaurs, that weathered the asteroid winter and the ice ages and every other catastrophe the planet has thrown at life. Sleep is not a luxury or an inconvenience. It is an inheritance. It is the nightly renewal of a contract between your body and the ancient rhythms of the earth. The darkness that falls each evening is the same darkness that fell on the Cretaceous. The trust you place in the world to keep you safe until morning is the same trust that a little feathered troodonantid placed in its fern bed 125 million years ago. You are connected to that animal by an unbroken thread of survival, night after night, generation after generation, stretching from that volcanic moment in Liaoning all the way to this very moment, right now, as you listen and begin to feel your own eyelids grow heavy. The dinosaur sleep story is, in the end, your story. It's the story of how the vulnerability of rest became a strength, how the need to shut down and recharge shaped evolution and behavior in ways that persist in your own brain and body. The dreams you'll have tonight are built on neural architectures that dinosaurs also possessed. The sensation of drifting off, that twilight between waking and sleeping, was felt by creatures that walked the earth long before any human ever lit a fire or spoke a word. You are not alone in the dark. You never have been. The ghosts of 1 billion dinosaur nights are wrapped around you, and the birds outside your window, tucked and dreaming in their own roosts, are the living proof that sleep endures. If you've stayed with me this far, you are probably in exactly the right state to drift off now. The story has been told. The night is quiet, and there's nothing left but to close your eyes and let the ancient machinery of sleep take over. If this journey into the prehistoric night has brought you some calm, some fascination, or just a good excuse to stay in bed a little longer, please leave a like on this video. Subscribe if you want more stories from the deep past, told in a way that respects your need for rest. And let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing the global map of insomniacs and dreamers who gather here each night, connected by curiosity and the universal need for sleep. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for trusting your attention to a story about dinosaurs and beds and the quiet dark of 100 million years ago. The world is noisy and demanding, but right now, in this moment, it's just you and the dark and the fading echoes of a past that is never truly gone. Sleep well. The dinosaurs are dreaming with you, and the morning will come, as it always has, bringing another chance to wake, to stretch and to live another day in a world that was once theirs and is now, for this brief, extraordinary moment, yours.